All right, thanks for joining me today. I have my good friend Shane Parker with me. And Shane, before I hit this introduce you, I just want to tell people who are going to be watching this what I'm trying to accomplish here. And we're in the midst of a pandemic crisis
Sure.
from COVID-19. It's impacting
Hmm.
people all over the world.
Right.
And I've talked to people on a pretty regular basis who are struggling with how to behave in this time, how to lead their organizations, lead their families. And by a lot of people, I mean me. Uh, I'm struggling with in this just surreal time where we're going into grocery stores and things like that, 10 people at a time and wearing masks and stuff.
Uh,
How do I lead my family through that? So been reaching out to some leaders that I know and respect to say, hey, what are you doing in this time? And so that's where I wanted to bring you in, get your expertise, and give people some practical steps and maybe some hope for how they're doing it or not doing it. So I have with me today Shane Parker, who currently serves as the director of the Doctor of Education and Doctor of Educational Ministry programs at Southwestern Seminary. You're also an associate professor there. Been married for 20 years to your wife, Lydia, father of two, uh, and the author of The Pastor's Life Practical Wisdom from the Puritans, among at least one other book. And I also had the privilege of being under your leadership and then serving alongside you for a period of time. So, Shane, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Mike, thanks so much for having me. It really is a joy to be here with you. And as I've said many times to you in different settings and contexts, I really am committed to learning and leading together. So I'm hoping we can all figure out how to lead in the midst of a truly unique time. I'm trying to do that every day, at least.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's jump right in. You've been a leader of businesses, organizations, both I believe inside of the church world,
mhm,
seminary, and then in the business world as well.
right.
And certainly, you've been leading your family for many years. What should the posture, mindset, attitude of a leader be in this time of all the Corona craziness?
Sure, sure. Uh, for me, obviously, my perspective on leadership is shaped by who I am. We all default to who we are ultimately in these times, right? So we say that challenge proves character, and so that's always true. But really, hardship just shows you what you struggle with at the end of the day. And so, for me, I think for everyone who would view this or even be looking for answers anywhere, I think they're going to go back to what's foundational for them, whether that's just ingrained habits, what they've done before, or whether what's truly meaningful to them shines through in these moments. And so for me, I think what a leader has to do ultimately um, is look to God. I think a leader has to look to who they understand God to be, not just conceptually, but do they personally know Him? I mean, I was reading this morning in the Psalms. I try to read the Bible every morning. I miss it some mornings. Holy Week, right? That's what we call this week leading up to Resurrection Sunday or Easter. A little easier to focus on that because everybody seems to be blowing up their social media. Have you done your Bible reading today? But
Right.
I was reading this morning and was reminded Psalm 23, very familiar. Even if you've never been in a church, probably been to a funeral service and heard Psalm 23 read at some point in time. And I'm struck by the way that the guy who wrote the psalm, David, he goes from talking about who God is to talking personally to God. And so, really, my answer to you is as simple as I think you have to look to God very actively in what you're doing,
Mm.
not just in terms of principally what's important to Him, what's truthful about Him, but do you know Him? And if you know Him, if you are believing and hoping in Him, that relationship, especially in a period and environment where we're starved to be present with each other, the fact that he would be always present with us and never absent,
Hmm.
I think it's been truly meaningful in these days for me. And
Yeah.
so I do think it's important to look to him very actively. Um, and there might be more we say about that
Yeah.
in these other responses.
Right. Well, and I think one of the, and I can't remember the pastor's name off the top of my head, but he said, "What you believe about God is the most important thing about you." So it sounds like that's kind of your, but
That's
even
very true.
look, I have, I've been a believer for since 2004.
Okay.
I grew up in the church before that,
Hmm.
but even now, I find myself, there are questions. They're like, "Hey, what is happening here? What are we
Sure.
doing here? What's the good that's coming from that? Is
Yeah.
that normal even for a leader?"
No, absolutely. I think it's normal, and I think it should be explicit in the way that a leader goes about doing what he or she does throughout the day. Here's what I mean by that. I think a measure of vulnerability in the midst of a commitment to be steady is important.
Yeah,
Uh, Positivity only takes you so far. I think that's different than being optimistic, for example. Being hopeful based on, again, as we just talked about, knowing who God is and knowing that you can trust his character and his sure presence, but also being optimistic in light of what you've understand him to have done in the past and what you think is coming. That's very different than being unduly positive
hmm,
and saying something is blue when everybody knows it's red, for
yeah,
example.
sure,
So I think being steady in the midst of that, part of the steadiness, frankly, I think is being honest with the people you lead. Hey,
mm,
I don't know what's going on here. Hey,
yeah,
I'm uncertain about these pieces. I'm more certain about these others. Hey, I'm not sure if we know the answers to these questions right now. But I do know, and I am certain about these other pieces that we have it dialed in. I think that ability to be honest, candid, but also be steady
mm,
and not unraveling. I think all that's important to lead because I think, first of all, it's sincere, and that's very important to me. But I think all leadership is founded ultimately on trust. And I just don't trust somebody who wants to spin or doctor up things that I know are negative. I can look right at them and tell that. I
right,
would rather you tell me the truth about it and tell me how we're going to approach it, meet it, and overcome it.
yeah.
So if you do both, I'm willing to follow you. If you mince around, tap toe, or spin, I'm just less apt to want to follow someone. I think that's probably true for most of us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot in there, but just a general summary, the posture of a leader right now should be one of steadiness.
steadiness is the word that I've not only been using, but honestly, I've had to confess even to my own family in moments where I'm not steady, where I am uncertain, when I am impatient, and so I see a lot of that on social media. Not as much as is accurate, right? This is a problem with social media, especially right now. That's the only connection we have to scores of folks.
Right.
They're not going to put on their social media pictures of them red faced at each other. They're going to put on social media their level of disappointment in themselves or the way they've spoken to their children or
Yeah.
interacted with them. You get more of the truth through memes sometimes from people
Yeah.
right now. That's how they're truly doing
Yeah.
through some of the memes they post rather than their pictures of vacations from last summer or whatever the
Right.
case might be.
Although I will say, there was a picture posted of me being put in the corner recently on
I,
social
I
media.
saw that. I saw that. And I thought that's exactly where you should be.
Yeah.
So that's fit. That's fit.
Thank you. All right. So how is leading a business or an organization different from you leading your family? I really have this desire to see what other leaders are doing with their families, but is there
Yeah.
a contrast there, how you would approach leading people in an organization versus leading your family?
It's certainly different. And in some ways, what we're convicted of and what's important to us probably should be the same. I mean, I was reading Harvard Business Review the other day, among other boring things that I read sometimes. But nevertheless, I was reading it the other day, and it struck me that admonitions coming from this particular research brief uh, were that there was such a almost duplicity in some organizational leaders because, for example, they would abhor micromanagement, but they micromanage their children like crazy.
Mm.
And so what they were trying to ascertain is, how do you smooth that and create more symmetry? Um, as I said, there are ways that the family's dissimilar, right? We all punch a time clock, even if we're on call 24/7. There are ways in which we can strategically compartmentalize what we do
Hmm.
in life and work. You just can't do that ultimately in regard to the family in the same ways that you can with your work vocation or that setting. And so there are ways in which they're different. There's a permanence in the relationships that we have in our family, even though obviously every member of our family, including ourselves, is going to die one day. There's still a permanent sense to that. Not in the same way, even if you work your job for half a century, will it be permanent?
Yeah.
Even then, they're going to give you the golden watch and clap for you for a few minutes, and you're gone, and the next person takes your place. So,
Right.
at the end of the day, there's a little bit of difference, but I would say, again, going back to that word steadiness, I think the way that you reassure, you provide clarity of direction, and also the necessary steps to take. I think that's the same. You asked the question a moment ago, or it was embedded in your question. What are practical things that you do? I just talk to my family about what's going on. I
Mhm.
recognize that this is a unique situation. I also want to focus on the unique opportunity we have in the midst of this time for them. They're not in school, and they're used to being in school, my children. And so having to do e-learning, I was jumping on this interaction with you the same time downstairs. My 11-year-old daughter's like, I got to get on my Zoom meeting right now. And I've got a week full of Zoom meetings, she commented to me last night. That's a strange conversation to be having with your 11-year-old daughter at this point, that her
Right.
schedule's full of Zoom meetings. Uh, but nevertheless, having to look at that and helping them not simply cope, that's important. How do you adjust?
Hmm.
But how do you push toward thriving? And I think part of that from a leadership standpoint is being very clear in what's important to you as a family.
Yeah.
Being very clear as to how these days can be angled toward what's important to you as a family, and then enjoying what you can. I mean, simple practical steps are, it's necessary to laugh with your kids and with your spouse,
Yeah.
with their grandparents, if the grandparents are in the home with you, if it's a multi-generational home. It's important to enjoy good times. There's a dark cloud over what's here,
Hmm.
and there ought to be a sense of brightness and joy in who we are, even in the midst of that. And there can be. So I don't think we need to feel unduly guilty about enjoying these things while also being very sober
Yeah.
about what's in front of us.
Yeah. We're going to come back and unpack a lot of the topics that you just touched on.
Sure.
But there's some similarities in leading an organization and a family. There's some differences. I was hoping
Sure.
to hear that I'd be able to fire one of my kids, but you did not say that. So we'll
You
move
could try
on.
it.
Huh?
You could try it. My sense is they would do what mine would do, and that's just laugh hysterically at you.
Yeah.
So at least that's what mine would do to me.
Right.
So,
Well, you brought up communication.
mhm.
Go back to that.
Sure.
The virus is starting to spread. It's kind of early
Sure.
on, and we
Mhm.
start seeing it kind of expand in the United States. What are those
Sure.
first conversations with your family, with your children look like?
Sure. Well, like we talked about earlier, I think what I'm trying to do in very real time, as we all are, right, is understand rightfully the information about what's occurring. Okay, now what does that mean for the globe? What does that mean for our nation, our state, our more immediate community, county, town? Okay, now my family. And I don't mean to overload that. You don't have to be overwhelmed with details about all that. But I'm trying to look both from a leadership standpoint, organizationally, and from the standpoint of the family. Okay, how do I have a knowledge base now that I'm able to communicate to them and do it on such a level that they would understand? I think that's key. So I won't back away from what I said about being genuine and sincere and honest and vulnerable. But I'm also not going to speak about historic malarial drugs that might be a therapeutic remedy for coronavirus. That would just be nonsensical. And I think sometimes we tend to do that. We don't know how to translate for, in my case, 11 and 13-year-old. especially because at those ages they can tend to be a little bit more charged by hormones, to overreact, to not know where to place their feelings or understanding. And so for me, it's to then take that knowledge and communicate quite actively. So every day I'm saying something about it. Every day is different as to how much I'm saying.
Mhm.
I have had them sit down and look at press briefings um, that the White House or the governor's office is giving, at least portions of it. Part of the reason I intentionally have done that is to say, again, there are people that have spent their lives addressing these issues. And aren't we grateful to God that in His grace, He's given us those people,
Yeah.
right? And so those people are to be trusted, and He ultimately is to be trusted because He's providing for us. So even there, I'm trying to use it as a teachable occurrence, but it does two things. It, first of all, appropriately shows them, okay, this is garnering nationwide, statewide, countywide, citywide concern. So to them, they just see that press briefing and go, oh, we don't normally do this. That's a big deal, right?
Mhm.
So they understand the severity of it. They don't have to understand all the details of it.
Mhm.
So again, even that incidentally and environmentally provides them a way to look at it. The counter to that is I'm not glued to a 24-hour news station, and I would caution against that. Not summarily. There's nothing wrong necessarily with having it on in the background, but I have watched both via social media and also personal interaction as some people have become paralyzed by staying glued to
Mhm.
their live stream or an actual television set or even on their phone. And they make the movements throughout the day based on that. I would caution against that.
Yeah.
I think, again, garnering information throughout the day is good. And then in the same way, trying to communicate that actively to your family is helpful. It keeps them apprised of what's going on. But I think, again, from a leadership standpoint, I'm looking for leaders to be in the know,
Mhm.
and not hide knowledge from me, but also disseminate or distill some of that knowledge from me so I can have greater confidence in where we're going. And
Yeah.
I think that's true organizationally. I hope that's true for a family as well.
Yeah. How do you balance that though? The trick that I'm finding is how do I balance providing information and just being forthright
Sure,
without crossing that line of scaring my kids to the point where they're going to run to their bedrooms and curl
sure,
up in the fetal position and
sure, sure. And I think that goes back to communication tone
mhm.
and presence as much as the wording and messaging.
Yeah.
The wording and messaging is something you have to be very intentional about organizationally, even in the organization of your family, if you want to call them that. But your presence and how you are responding, I know it in my own life and in my own tendencies. There are certain issues about which I will overreact. My wife confronted me on that the other day. You're overreacting. And I was a little shocked because I was like, overreact about that? She's like, yeah, pretty consistently. But in other areas, I don't do that at all. So back to the steadiness motif that I keep bringing here, uh, I think it's helpful to understand how you communicate about it. So knows what you're doing. Um, we're not being alarmed, my wife and I, in the household. We're not running around. We are listening to the CDC in regard to what they're saying, what they're understanding the pandemic spread to be, and what we can individually control
Mhm.
about our actions and our habits. And we're doing the best by it that we can. Every household's going to be different, especially and particularly if they're employed in an essential capacity, the mom and dad are. That's going to dictate how you operate and how you function. But I know plenty of households that are marshaled by a healthcare worker, and the
Mhm.
healthcare worker is being very confident, very even keel. They're doing what they need to do to protect their family, even self isolating when they come home. I mean, we've all heard the stories about them sleeping in garages. That's really happening. And I think the fact that they're taking effort to do that and still showing their family, hey, this is something that we're going to walk through together. And we're going to have to take individual precautions, but no one's hitting the eject button out of the roof of their house, right? No one,
Mhm.
no one is trying to get away in such a fashion that they can't be in the moment
Yeah.
and be confident toward one another. So I think your tone and demeanor is just as important as the words you use.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that in very direct response to your question. I think the way you don't cross the line is informationally don't overload with what you say. And I think the way you go about it is very important,
Yeah.
is very reassuring. And I think we find ourselves doing that. If we watch press briefings, for example, or we watch any type of newscast and the individuals speaking are alarmed or uncertain, I mean, we can feel it, let alone think it, right, in and of ourselves, as opposed to someone being very clear, articulating what's there, and their demeanor being, we're going to lead you through this.
Yeah.
Same thing's true for us.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I've found is that I take that information in and I try and think ahead. Okay, what does this mean?
Right.
Where does
Yeah,
this? What path is this leading us down? So I've been
sure.
very careful to communicate to my kids the information, the facts that we know,
Yeah,
without necessarily adding my projection to that, trying to predict the future, even though
perfect.
inside of me I am
Sure,
trying to
sure.
predict that.
Sure you are. Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's been a key. If I start adding my future guesses to it, that's where I think you can cross a line too and get everybody fired up about it.
I think that's a great point, Mike, and a great insight. I mean, that really goes to facts or relative information and then interpretation, right? I think we all have to recognize we're interpreting the information that we're getting, and that's true about every topic ever in our lives,
Mhm.
right? So we want to interpret facts, we want to interpret information. I mean, everything I've done in response to your questions is an interpretation of information, even from the very outset of what I've said. I think how you interpret it matters. And then being very clear to not start trying to interpret and prognosticate in ways that you really don't know.
Yeah.
You can't be certain around. I think that's healthy. And it'll go back to another key idea for me, and that's humility.
Mhm.
I think if you demonstrate that there are things you don't know, it shows that you're still going to exercise the courage and confidence in the moment. We trust, we pray. If God be gracious to you in that way, you can do that, but do it in such a way that you're being humble about what's occurring, that you don't have all the answers.
Yeah, yeah.
That's healthy.
Is there a have you found a need to actively try and maintain or build morale in your family during this time, or is it everything that you're doing is kind of keeping that morale steady?
I think you've heard a lot from many people, I'm sure, about finding a rhythm. I don't know if we found a rhythm or not. I'm not even sure what that looks like right now in this period of time. So when you figure it out, Mike, you let me know because I'm counting on you, buddy. But nevertheless, trying to find a rhythm is one thing that I think can sustain morale. But we are all very individual, and it's often been said because it's so true. The person that influences you the most is the one who talks to you the most, and that's you,
Mm.
right? So we have these conversations with ourselves all the time. Probably not audibly, that's a different topic, right? But we're reflecting on everything that's coming at us. And so I think it does two things within your family and even within your team organization. First of all, I fail to recognize quite consistently I can communicate to a group of people. I can even communicate to the three other members of my family, but they are individual people
Mm.
and they are influencing themselves all the time. And so I think having very individual time with each family member is important.
Okay.
I mean, so for example, my son the other day, my daughter yesterday, we downloaded the Zombies Run app. You don't know what that is. I like to run. My kids don't love it, but they're liking it more because it's an interactive app. We put the earbuds in, and then zombies chase us.
Huh.
And it's this story being told. Not advocating for that. I'm simply saying that that's given me individual time with them in a creative way. We love to play baseball out in our yard. So a neighbor walked by the other day and said, well, at least I get to see a baseball game this way. I was like, I don't know if this is actually a baseball game, if you could call it that, but we're having fun. So I think spending time individually and then listening for cues,
Mhm. Mm.
right? So being proactive in questioning, we can become overwhelmed as parents and go, am I asking the right questions? What am I doing? A lot of it's just listening to them. What are they saying about what they're experiencing? So, for example, a very unique situation. We're actually relocating in the midst of this across several states. That's a little challenging right now to be trying to do that. But nevertheless, what's happened for our kids is that they not only had to deal with the end of their school year, they had to deal with the fact they're probably not going to see their friends again at all
Yeah.
because we're moving. And we may come back and visit. We hope we do. But nevertheless, there's a sense of loss there that's unique to them. And then individually, they handle that very differently. My son is less apt to be forlorn about it and down in the dumps. My daughter's very saddened by that. And
Mm.
there are certain moments where it's overwhelming to
Yeah.
her. So to talk about not only the reality of that, enter in and be empathetic with her in that, but also truly and sincerely say, but there's a lot of bright things that are coming too. Like when we get where we're going, there's more of your family around you that you've missed a lot and
Yeah.
you've had to be away from a lot over these years. And so just trying to be sensitive to that and honestly do less talking and more listening. So if there was just a core admonition in the midst of all this rambling I'm doing, perhaps it's that.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's just to listen and be present.
Yeah.
Because again, we're the only ones that can be present with each other during this quarantine time. So just being around, and Mike, you and I have had conversation in other settings about this. That's probably the key admonition, even in the most severe times of life, anyway. Especially when it comes to a funeral setting or a deep, severe loss of a family member in any context. When you're there, a lot of what those people need that have lost someone or lost something that's important to them is just for you to be there
Yeah.
and listen to them and be present. And so we're only really able to do that fully and not virtually like we are here if we're with our family right now for the vast majority of us. So I think not taking that for granted
Hmm.
and entering into that and grabbing hold of it would be important as well.
Yeah. Steve Farrar, author of the book Point Man, he makes the point that quality time happens in the midst of quantity time. So
That's right. That's good.
being
Yeah.
present, and you make a good point, listening for those cues, because if you're just passing in a hallway or in the living room, you're rarely going to get the kid that pipes up and says, "Hey, I'm struggling with
Right.
with
Right.
this." But
Right.
in the
Yeah.
midst of tossing a ball or,
Yeah.
doing chalk art on the
Yep.
driveway, you
Yes.
might
Yeah.
get one of those cues, and now it's okay. Now we can have a deep dive. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
My wife, confession, does just an amazing job of wanting to be present with the kids, and I'm ever working on that.
Yeah.
But we do take time to try to, even within the midst of these conversations, as I'm doing the daily briefing,
Yeah.
I'm the daily briefing guy. Here's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
There will be cues there where we can take those deep dives. So,
Yeah. That's good.
uh, we talk in organizational leadership, we talk about the mission and the vision
Hmm.
and reinforcing that on a regular basis.
Sure.
Does the mission change? Does it have to take a back seat in a time like this, or is it still important to say, hey, we still have a mission? Maybe there's a little bit of a hurdle here. What is your thought on that? Does the mission change or take a back seat in a time like this?
Yeah, a part of it would be how we're using those words, and I'm not going to parse them. I'm just saying it will flex a little bit depending on the organization. How are they using the word vision and mission? I would just say at the end of the day, if your core conviction is that your organization exists to fulfill X, whatever that might be, if that's been so deeply rooted in a need that provides for human dignity,
Mhm.
cares for flourishing of people, and actually exercises your abilities, your talents, and the allocation of gifts that your company has, then I don't think you can throw that to the side and go, we're not going to do that anymore. If it was important enough for you to found an organization, grow a business up, and continue to move toward it, I think you still have to fulfill it.
Yeah.
Your question is, how do you fulfill it, right? And is it okay to back off the gas some? I think it is okay to back off the gas some in certain ways. I think you have to take a little bit of a step back to assess the landscape. And I think even if we use militaristic notions, that would be true,
Mm.
right? This is as if several atom bombs were dropped in significant battle arenas. Well, that not only changes the landscape, that changes the wartime arena itself, right? Okay, now how are we going to move troops? How many troops do we have left? If we have them left over here and not here, does that change the front that we want to fight on? I mean, all those analogies could come to mind. But I think it's important to step back and not get ahead of ourselves in certain ways. Um, it's going to seem like a bit of a jab. Maybe it is a little bit. I would be very careful about where you once had very virtuous intentions, value-driven intentions, saying this is an opportunity to gain, and it could be, but then giving into greed in that. So
Mhm.
that's a big caution that I would
Yeah.
have. There is nothing wrong with earning money. There's actually quite a bit appropriate with earning money. It's more the motive for earning and then what we choose to do with those earnings.
Yeah.
Those are the issues at stake there from a moral standpoint.
Yeah.
And so I would be careful of notions about get your unfair share right now. First of all, I would never post that or say that, especially in a time where people are losing their lives and suffering a pandemic.
Yeah.
That's going to have a very negative ring, and I just fundamentally disagree with it. So that's my personal soapbox. I'm down off that now. But nevertheless, I think you have to be careful about that, while at the same time recognizing there is unique opportunity here in commerce and marketplace. There are deemed essential vocations and essential businesses that will benefit here. So I think that's where you have to dig down into the marrow of who are we from a conviction and value standpoint. Are we providing something that's meaningful to our community and to individuals in our community? And I would say your job is a good example of that. I mean, your job fundamentally is to provide the conduit through which people arrive at a place to live and to make a home, which right now is the only place they can be as
Mhm.
a majority of people. I mean, this has shown us again how important the home, the making of a home is. And so it's quite legitimate that you would continue to think actively while at the same time, I mean, you're having to deal with the reality of you have to do virtual tours. You can't do in-person tours any longer in
Right.
our state.
Yeah.
And so I think those things mean recalibration, but I don't think that means that you step away from what you're seeking to do. It just takes a lot of real time, day in, day out flexibility,
Sure.
right? To figure out how do you best do it now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think that's, believe it or not, a short answer to that question.
Yeah.
It would
Sure.
depend on the individual business,
Yeah.
and it also depends on the structure of the business too. I think as to how you best get at that. But yeah, I wouldn't step away from who you are.
Hmm.
I think in other instances, for people who have maybe a number of businesses they're engaged in or side hustles, which have become quite prolific. I think some people are going to shift away from their primary. Your side hustle is going to become primary now.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by assessing. I think some people are going to pour gas on the fire of where they've been without thinking about, can it burn, or is there torrential downpour coming to
Yeah.
put that fire out? So that's what I mean. I think we're always doing that in business. I hope we are
Yeah.
assessing, allocating, moving forward. We always have to be doing that very actively. But I don't think you have to step away from what
Yeah. You brought up you use the word opportunity in regards to business, and and I want to be sensitive. Obviously, we have a pandemic, right? But I
you're doing.
want
Yes.
to apply that to family leadership. Do you see
Mm-hmm.
opportunity here in the midst of the crisis? We've got all of
Yep.
these restrictions put on us. You talked about the dark cloud hanging over us. Is
Mm-hmm.
there opportunity within the family context that you see?
I think there's immense opportunity. And some of that I even alluded to a bit earlier. My fuller response to that question is the opportunity comes in that just what we said about business is true about your family. You've kind of been reduced to, who are you really as a family now? I mean, you got to look that in the face every day. And some things you're going to like, I pray, and some things you're going to go, I wish that was different, right? What you have to do is resist the urge to go, I got to change that right now. Everything's got to change right now. Like, you didn't get to the poorer parts of who you are as a family overnight, and they're probably not going to change overnight, but they are built from what you're committed to. So I think it gives opportunity for you to have conversation and a listening postured conversation in a meaningful way, in ways where otherwise you find excuses to get away from each other,
Yeah.
honestly. I think also even family to family, uh, Zooming. I mean, we even in our community group structure through our church, we've had Zoom community group meetings. That's been a very good means just to share as a family. I think that's important, whether or not you're engaging or interacting with your local church, your faith community, via live stream, or whether they're just trying to keep in communication with you through phone, whatever means. I think it's important to maintain that connection. I say that because, and this is a bit of a side note, but important for us to recognize, the pandemic has pushed everyone toward their home, which for many of us, I pray, is a safe haven and a place of meaning where we do value each other, even if we get on each other's nerves consistently, right? We still care for, we're committed. For others, it's not a safe haven. It's not a place where they are free from abuse. And so I would even say, as a leader, being sensitive to those in your organizations that are in their home, I think asking them, whether you would be open to or even find meaning, asking them, how can I pray for you? How can I be sensitive to you? How can I support you? Also, at least asking good questions around that. I think that's good leadership to show support and care for your organization, even now. But I think the opportunity is there to care without our family, right, for other families, and within our family to really take stock of who we are and just spend time doing what we wouldn't otherwise do. I have encountered for a number of families, they feel like they have more time to spend together. I mean, my kids can't play sports now, so they have that time. They're in school for probably half the time by the time their work is done. And so use that time just to have fun and connect with them. I would say also within that, have intentional, meaningful conversations. I'm trying to spend time in prayer with them at least every couple days and do that together as a family. But I think just having opportunity there to see the simple strokes of daily life as an open door to step into, I think that's the key. So you can tell my response, I'm trying to give you simple rather than say, oh, what do I have to do? Do I have to have a strategic plan? Do I need to write down 30 pages of what I'm going to do? I think it really does come back to presence and steadiness in the presence of being there and just making yourself available while also taking stock of who you are. I mean, and not beating yourself up about it, right? Trusting the Lord. If you're a believing person, I think trusting the Lord, looking to Him and saying, God, I am not in control. And this is a stark reminder every second of every day that I'm not, even though I tricked myself into thinking I was. And so I need your help. I need your help for my relationships to be more whole and healthy. I need your help to lead well. I need your help to interact in a way that's caring. Whatever the case might be for you, whatever you might need.
Well, and I think you touched on, one of the things that you said was we can run away from this, even though we're all confined to a home. Most of us have big enough homes where we can go in our bedroom and lock the door and get away from it. And there is a definite appeal to I can just but one of the opportunities I've seen within my family is you said it. I mean, we typically, outside of this, we're running directions. We're kind of passing around the dinner table on some nights. Other nights it's just we'll meet at time. This is an opportunity with that has been forced upon us. To have real interaction, FaceTime. You talk about filling in the gaps. Where have we been missing out on all these years? And can we start building greater bonds and things there? So I appreciate that. We're several weeks in. What kind of thoughts are you having now? How has your thought process changed? Your approach to leading your family? Is there anything different that's changed and grown over the last several weeks?
I think over the last several weeks, we've all begun to come to terms with this much longer road. Perhaps we thought we were nearing the end and we're going to turn a corner. And it might be more like a mid-distance highway than a short dirt road in terms of coming out the other side of this and whatever coming out the other side of this looks like. And so I think that's changed the way I've communicated about it, because initially the communication was, all right, if we just exercise these measures, social distancing, wash our hands, if we do that at a requisite level, we'll get over the initial curve of what's there, and then some degree of normalcy will come back in. What became very clear by the time there was an initial secondary postponement of their school year, my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, really, it's the end of the year. And what they're doing is very kindly giving us a slower drip so we can come to terms with it. They're not signaling the end of it yet. And so I think part of that's informed my own leadership within our family. You said it earlier. I think my posture has changed to elongate my view of what's there, but give them what they can understand right now. So give them maybe here's the end of the highway we're coming to. Here's what seems certain, but we don't know the exact distance, right? So trying to prepare them for possibilities while also just making sure they understand realities, right? So I think all of that has to come into play. I also think what we've tried to do has changed. Instead of feel like we have to inject everything that we've been talking about that's good, spending time with them individually, into these 2 weeks, right? These 14 days we're going to be isolated. We now realize it's just going to be us for a while. And what's interesting is, again, relocating, very unique situation. I know we're going to relocate, if the Lord's faithful to do it in that way, sometime mid to late May. Well, we've still got people in our extended family where we're relocating who are immunocompromised. So we may have the odd sensation of we relocate and we're very close to them, but we still can't see them, right? Or we have to see them at a distance across the parking lot, or I don't know what it looks like. So nevertheless, trying to do that and preparing them even for what's there, that's changed, right? Because we thought maybe we would relocate and then have a sense of reunion, their physical reunion. That may not be the case for some months to come. And even organizationally, we've had to deal with that. I primarily right now serve in higher education. The complexion of courses changed overnight for the spring semester at every institution. But it looks like they're going to change for the summer and potentially the fall as well for most institutions. So what does that mean? And what will that mean for our family? So how we've done things has changed overnight, almost every night, because we're getting more information. We think we're learning more about getting a handle here, but there's much yet to be learned. So yes, it's changing, and I don't know what it'll look like tomorrow. So,
As we wrap up here, anything from a leadership of your family context that we missed, that we didn't cover, that you want to make sure that you get out there?
I do think maintaining regularity with not just how you have conversation, but how you have conversation around who God is and what is He doing. I think that is not simply a thread. I think it's a steel rope that will run through the middle of whatever this experience is, and however we might reflect upon it. I think you and I both posted jokes about how we're going to journal about this experience. There's some truth to it. I think recording even your family's experience, if the Lord's faithful to bring more generations to your family, I think your grandkids and great grandkids might read about what you experienced during this time, what you thought about. But I think having some degree of consistent, meaningful time for Bible reading and prayer as a family, and just again, teachable opportunities to have conversation. It was very helpful. Our pastor's sermon this past Sunday, as we live streamed in, was about God's sovereignty. So God is the king. He's in control, even though we may not have all the answers. And to some extent, if we had all the answers, we'd try to change things, right? So there's some sense in which we might try to do the very evil things we see sometimes in the Bible, where people hear from God, they hear from God's prophet, and then they think that's a certain statement of God about what He's going to do because He cares for us, but we're going to try to change it. We're going to try to make things go differently, even though we don't have the power to do that ultimately. It was a reassuring thing, not just to hear that word from the church, but also we've been talking in terms of that with our family. I even said it a moment ago, but that's become a pretty common phrase with us. We know we're not in control now. Like we say that frequently. That's good. That's a healthy thing to know, that you're not in control, and you can't be lax in doing the things you need to do. Both are true. So faithfulness we have to be about today, and we have to know ultimately God's faithful to do what He purposes to do. I just think the teaching, instruction around who God is, and giving them good habits of commitment and faithfulness in these days, even though they're uncertain. My prayer is that, especially for our children, that will grow them into thinking about faithfulness every day and dependence upon God, and not being erratic in their own lives as they grow into adulthood and have their own family.
Yeah. Well, and that's, you want to talk about opportunity. This is something that I've been trying hard to incorporate, is that even when we get these news stories, we get this new information that it comes in, using that as a tripwire, a trigger
That's good.
to
Yeah, that's
interpret
good.
those stories to my kids and to myself
Yeah.
with a biblical worldview.
Hmm.
How does the
Yeah.
Bible inform what we're talking about here? So it
Yeah.
creates an incredible opportunity to have these conversations with a biblical worldview in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's a constant reminder to me. It's a text I've gone back to again and again. Psalm 32. Again, the psalmist switches from "This is who God is" to personally you, God, and he makes a profound statement. He makes a statement that God watches with his eye upon himself. He's addressing himself and his relationship, but really that's true for anyone who's hoping in Christ, believing in Jesus. And that phrase is so rich because I mean we've all had our kids playing in the yard, right? And they're playing in the yard, and if they're playing close to you when they're younger, when my kids are younger, I'm not really paying that much attention. Like if I can hear them and they're breathing, nobody's screaming with a broken arm, I'm really not paying that much attention. But as soon as they go toward the road, I'm watching like a hawk.
Yeah.
And I'm instructing them and saying, look both ways. I know the ball went out in the street. You better. And I'm watching them like a hawk. And if a car were to come, I would pray. I would have the courage to intervene. I hope any of us fathers and mothers would do that. Right. That's actually the picture in Psalm 32. Is God is intently watching like a parent with their child crossing the street of life, if you will. Right.
Mhm,
Even through
mhm.
pandemic, and whatever might befall us, he cares so deeply and intently is watching and guiding us. And I think those pictures that are scriptural, and they're helpful because they're scriptural, because they're rooted in who God is, those are things that need to guide us, whether we're leading our organization or trying to lead our spouse or our children, that God ultimately is guiding us, watching over us in that way, intently caring for us. That makes all the difference in the world when you're trying to take in news feeds or communicate with your child who's made it melting down, whatever the case might be. I think to shore yourself up in who God is really does change the complexion of everything that you'll do and everything I think you'll gain from this time. At least that's been my prayer for
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. Final question, maybe more lighthearted. We'll see.
Yeah, sure,
What's something you miss? Our routines have been interrupted.
sure, sure.
Restaurants have been closed. We're eating more
Yeah,
meals at home. Uh,
yeah.
what's something that you miss that you can't wait to go back to?
Man, what do I miss? I think I probably miss the movie theater a
Mm,
little bit, just because we as a family like to go to movies,
yeah,
probably on a healthy level. So it's a good check for us too. Um, but I miss going to movies. I miss being there and taking in some things we had hoped to see in the spring and even in the summer, like Maverick movie, Top Gun. It got delayed. Now it's
yeah,
not till December. That's disappointing. But nevertheless, I think that's one piece. And you're right. It's humorous. It's minor. It's definitely not a necessity.
yeah,
Um, I miss that, and to some extent, I miss being able to just, and this is very minor, being able to just go out in the community and see it full of people,
hmm,
like going to the grocery store, which we're trying not to do for the next 10 days. But going to the grocery store and realizing the only reason why I see people who are more senior or elderly or because I go right after the hour allotted for them. Otherwise, I wouldn't see people in that age bracket except in my neighborhood.
yeah,
So when I walk, and that's important to me uh, to be around people that are in every age demographic. It's important for my kids to be around that.
yeah.
So that's hard. I miss that. So that's a little less lighthearted, but I miss that as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I miss sitting down in a restaurant with a friend and sharing a meal. And I actually invited one of my friends to a virtual Zoom lunch, and he thought
Like,
that was too weird, so
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
get to follow through. Shane Parker, thanks for joining me today. Shane is the director of the Doctor of Education and Doctor of Educational Ministry programs at Southwestern Seminary. And he is also the author of The Pastor's Life: Practical Wisdom from the Puritans, which you can find on Amazon and order a bunch of copies there. Amazon is still delivering. Shane, thanks for joining me today.
Mike, I'm honored that you would have me, and thank you. I really appreciate our friendship, and I appreciate the fact that we're not alone in this pursuit of trying to lead well during a pandemic. I don't think we ever thought we'd be doing that, but the Lord's faithful. He's good.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane.